Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to our second, hopefully, of many more installments of the on-cam HNEpod. So my name's Josh, I'm your host of this episode, and we have a few interesting topics here today. So the first one is really breaking down the leaked information that came out about Colin Trevorrow's original Episode 9 story for Star Wars, which is really interesting because instead of going The Rise of Skywalker as the title, it was going to be the Duel of the Fates, which is obviously a callback to the infamous Duel of the Fates, but just the fact that this story is so different, which we'll touch upon, it just really shocks me. So that's our first thing here, and looking at my notes, our second topic, so it's actually pretty cool. We have the HBO Max Green Lantern series, which I'm personally pretty excited for. I'm a huge Green Lantern fan myself. I stopped reading the comics, though, about a year ago just because there's a little bit too much going on for me personally. But before that, I mean, even going into the whole Cronus Gauntlet thing with Hal Jordan and all that craziness before the ultraviolet spectrum really got into it and all the other stuff happening, I've been pretty diehard Green Lantern. And then after that, we're going to talk about the CW crossover and possible implications from that, because I don't think anyone, even people that worked on the show, that obviously, unless you're Grant Gustin, no one saw that coming. So there's a lot of implications regarding how it came to be, what happened in it, and going forward, what we might see. And last but not least, we have this new Superman and Lois TV show. We have some updates on that, and even talking here about the costume, which looks pretty dope. If I'm speaking honestly here, that they're going to have Superman wear going forward. So getting on to the first topic, the way we're going to do this here today is we're going to go over kind of like segments of these details. So the first part, we're going to talk about the Rey stuff. The second part, we're going to talk about the Kylo stuff. We're going to talk about the Knights of Ren portion because they have a much more important, not arc necessarily, but their impact and their involvement is much more impactful, much more vital to Colin Trevorrow's story versus what we got in the final J.J. Abrams, version of Episode 9. And also, one thing I want to mention first and foremost is that there's no Palpatine in Colin Trevorrow's version. There's no Palpatine, there's no Rey Skywalker. It's very much more in line with what we've seen before. So the reasons why they didn't go that route remains to be unseen, but you can definitely see some of the carryover with certain things. So getting on to the first stuff here with Rey, first and foremost, like I said, she's not Palpatine's granddaughter, which I think for a lot of Star Wars fans is a pretty important detail, because I know a lot of people heavily disliked that kind of twist, if you want to call it that, even though certain other things, elements, if you will, are present in this film. For example, she's able to use Force Lightning, and it's noted that it's purple Force Lightning, but that plays an important role to her character and what she's going to be doing in this film, more so than it plays an important part in revealing that she's Palpatine's heir, so to speak. So Rey's lightsaber in this movie actually is double-bladed, built off of her staff that she's used in the previous films. And besides being double-bladed, which is pretty cool on its own right, it has a boomerang-like effect. I mean, that's really just how it's described. So what I'm assuming is she uses it as a projectile of some kind in the film, and it just kind of comes around like a boomerang and she gets it back. I mean, besides that, I don't know how else you would describe it unless the lightsaber blade itself somehow does like a boomerang arc. But I don't think that's even possible, and I don't think they've ever shown that before. So that just seems kind of like a pulling out of nowhere type of attribute to put to a lightsaber. But getting on even past that, it's revealed in this movie that Snoke ordered Rey's parents to be killed with, again, no relation to Palpatine whatsoever, and the Knights of Ren were the ones who actually did the execution. However, Kylo Ren couldn't bring himself to kill a young Rey, so that's why Rey was spared, which I think is a really interesting way of connecting them. But anyways, getting on past that, another interesting thing with Rey is her last name, instead of being Palpatine like it was in the final theatrical cut of J.J. Abrams' version, it is Salada. So as far as I could tell, Solana as a last name doesn't really have any importance family-wise within the Star Wars films. It's not like Skywalker, it's not like Palpatine, it's not like a Kenobi being a last name and that big reveal that would come with it. So this carries on with what they were doing in The Last Jedi, where they were saying that she is more or less a nobody, but that doesn't even matter, I guess, with all intents and purposes, to being the next Jedi, the next hero, things like that. Like, you don't have to be just a Skywalker to be important in the galaxy, which I guess was a part of the message carrying over from episode 8. And they also touch upon how Rey eventually at the end of the film creates her own Jedi school using children from all over the galaxy, like it was teased at the end of episode 8, children all over the galaxy that display abilities with the Force. And she actually does that with Finn, who is also Force sensitive. At least by the end of this movie, they come out and say he's Force sensitive, with him deliberately using certain abilities in the Force besides telekinesis. Now, during a certain point in the film, and we'll touch upon this when we talk more about the Kylo stuff, but Rey is almost killed by Kylo Ren, and she experiences an interesting version of a Force vision, if you want to call it that. And basically, she thinks she's almost one with the Force. She's in this weird realm, if you will, and she sees the Force ghost of Luke, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and all of them are basically telling her that she has a choice here. She could become one with the Force, or she can go back to the mortal world of the living. And Rey chooses to be a Jedi in the living. And the reason why that's really important is because she actually gets Obi-Wan's blessing in the story to do so, but she decides to create a new way of the Jedi, focusing on finding balance within yourself. Because Rey thinks by finding balance in yourself, if everybody does that, then you'll, by product, I guess, bring balance to the whole galaxy, instead of it being a just simply light over darkness kind of thing, which again goes off of what was said in episode 8 about balance and about how, if you just have too much light, the darkness comes to meet it, and vice versa. Too much darkness, the light will rise to meet it. So this way, by finding balance within, kind of a gray Jedi, if you will, Rey brings balance that way versus, just by destroying Palpatine, I guess, which even the writers of the J.J. Abrams version said that is temporary balance, not full balance in its own right. So definitely really interesting stuff right there. But with that, that's why I said it's important she's able to do things like use Force Lightning, because she's able to use those traditional dark side Force techniques, but not fall to the dark side herself. And still she uses abilities like Force Healing and other light side techniques. So all in all, it's an interesting direction with the character, having her bring balance in that aspect versus doing something that basically retcons Anakin's whole importance to the franchise. Now, touching on the Knights of Ren, one thing that's really interesting I find in this version of the Knights of Ren is that the main antagonist in this film, outside of Kylo, is a member of the Knights of Ren. Now, the specific member, her name's actually really interesting. She's a member of Darth Maul's species, which I think is really cool that they are bringing them back, because visually there's just really dynamic design for the alien culture. But she basically is a member in the second command of the Knights of Ren, even being above hierarchy-wise General Hux. So they say in the story, Hux actually has to report to her instead of Kylo Ren when Kylo's out on missions. And when Kylo as the supreme leader is doing certain things, especially with Kylo trying to find a way to kill Rey and basically extinguish any light within him, she, along with the other Knights of Ren, start to challenge the idea that Kylo can truly lead the Knights of Ren where they want to go. Now, this character's name is Solani, and she's really interesting because she ends up in the final draft of the script that Colin Trevorrow was trying to do, because there's different versions, but in the final version, during the final act of the film, she finds a Sith holocron that Kylo found previously. And because she fully embraces the dark and isn't conflicted like Kylo Ren, she's able to unleash a hidden power within this holocron, which gives her these immense dark side abilities, which allows her to do things like battle both Kylo and Rey at the same time, which leads to the final conflict. Now, another thing I find interesting also is that they do this to a slight degree in the final cut of this movie, but in this script, they are actively for the entire movie hunting Rey and other members of the resistance throughout the entire film. It's not just like a little 5-minute thing throughout the whole movie. Like, it's from the beginning to the middle to the end, the Knights of Ren are constantly hunting down Rey and her friends, and Solani at the end actually gets killed by Rey, by the Force lightning that Rey uses as, I guess, revenge, because during the final act of the film, Kylo Ren sacrifices himself to protect Rey from Solani, and then from there, basically, Rey becomes a beacon of light in the universe, and she broadcasts her name. She doesn't say Skywalker, she says, "My name is Rey Solani," and I need your help. Now, with Kylo Ren's character, one thing I found interesting is that he is evil in this movie. At least in all but the final drafts of Colin Trevorrow's script, Kylo Ren is not seeking redemption. He actually finds a Sith holocron, which is actually created by Darth Plagueis in the final version of Colin Trevorrow's draft, which is pretty cool. And it essentially leads Kylo Ren off to find an ancient Sith master who may or may not have trained the likes of Plagueis and Sidious. And this guy is hidden on a far remote world that used to be a very powerful Sith area, but there's just death everywhere. And supposedly he's there to remind himself that as long as a Jedi lives in the universe, the Sith will be more or less like this, in this condition. Convinces him to train Kylo in the ways of the dark side of the Force, because Kylo Ren in this movie is actively trying to extinguish, like he has been in the past few films, any existence of light, conflict, etc. Like, he wants to be a dark side guy. He wants to be a villain. He doesn't want any redemption in all but the final act of this film. However, in the final act, he does get redemption in the form of a change of heart. There is a Han Solo moment, like in the J.J. Abrams version, but something interesting in this version, before Leia even passes away, is that with the holocron that Kylo Ren finds, it kind of explodes in his face because he is conflicted. So it's kind of like, I guess, Darth Plagueis' way of giving a middle finger to Kylo for not being a full-on Sith or dark side, I guess, admirer or user. And that disfigures Kylo Ren's face, and that's more or less kind of like a wake-up moment for Kylo in a lot of respects, at least from how it's described, because, you know, he's injured, he's hurt, and then he's taken care of by the village people. Now, in this final version, like I said before, it's just kind of weird how Kylo's turn is, because it's not super clear exactly what motivates his turn other than simply the kindness of these village people, if that makes sense. So seeing that slowly but surely starts igniting a ember of not hope necessarily, but of compassion. And from that compassion, he starts becoming more Ben Solo again, especially once Leia passes away and he has a vision of his father kind of talking some common sense into him. Now, one other thing in the not final draft, but when in the other drafts, when Kylo's full on evil just forever, basically, something I found interesting is that the master that teaches Kylo Ren, who's named Tor Valum, teaches Kylo Ren an interesting technique in the Force, which basically allows him to cheat death. Now, according to Tor, this ability is by sucking the living Force out of other living beings. And it's kind of like a vampiric Force ability, and it's actually something that's been seen in the Legends books before. But through using this ability, Kylo's able to suck the energy from other Force users, and he can use it to either heal himself, obviously kill others, or extend his own life. So that's how this character supposedly has lived for so long, and they say he's lived for like 7,000 years. And he does that by constantly using this vampire-like Force ability. So eventually, in some versions of the story, Colin Trevorrow was writing Kylo in rage because he goes to a cave, kind of like in Empire Strikes Back. He meets a version of Darth Vader, and Darth Vader basically whoops his butt. And in anger for not being able to defeat Darth Vader, Kylo storms off, meets Tor. Tor says something to him that Kylo doesn't like, which basically is like, you're not ready, you're not powerful enough in the dark side, you're never going to be more powerful than Vader, something along the lines of that. But it's enough that pushes Kylo over the edge, and Kylo uses the vampire-like Force ability to drain him. And then later in a version of the script, while Kylo is fighting Rey, he almost kills Rey by draining her with this Force vampire-like ability, until in this version of the story, Leia is able to talk some sense to him through the Force. And when that happens, Kylo kind of snaps out of it, returns the life energy into Rey, but unfortunately as a byproduct dies. So that's in all but the final version of the script. In the final version of Colin Trevorrow's script, according to the sources that leaked it out, what happens is they fight the Knights of Ren member who goes super evil. Kylo sacrifices himself, and then Rey basically Force lightnings her to death after that as revenge, and then peace is restored to the galaxy. And another interesting thing I find in this movie is that Leia's role actually is not different, very much so, than what it is in the final version that J.J. Abrams did. She's basically at a resistance base for the entire movie. for the most part. And she does actually use like the same Force ability, except for I guess it's more blatant in Colin Trevorrow's version since it was primarily written before Carrie Fisher's tragic passing. But she more blatantly communicates with Kylo Ren. And also Luke is more active in this movie as a Force ghost, basically haunting Kylo Ren, trying to make him see that, basically the path to darkness is not the way to go, to become Ben Solo again, etc., etc. So it does fit more in line with what Rian Johnson was doing, where he said, "See you around, kiddo." Because for the most part, I don't think Luke Skywalker's ghost really saw him around much in The Rise of Skywalker. But leave your comments down below. What do you think about this version of the events for Star Wars Episode 9? Personally, I do like it better. I think it's a much more original, maybe not as satisfying depending on the execution of it, but I do think it's a little bit more exciting and more original, which I would have preferred versus, kind of what we got in The Rise of Skywalker, even though I did enjoy moments of that movie in its own right. But leave your comments down below about this segment. What do you guys think about the Colin Trevorrow details that we now know of? Would you have preferred his version of events, or do you like The Rise of Skywalker better? Thanks for checking out this episode of the HNEpod. Please leave comments below with the hashtag HNEpod, any viewer questions you guys might have. Also, any suggestions for the on-cam. This is still very new for us that we're doing it. I'm going to change the background sometime soon to have some movie posters and other more dynamic things on there. Maybe a green screen, besides simply just like a background wall. But leave your comments down below, any suggestions you guys might have, any, comments, concerns, positive criticisms, anything we could do to make this show better for you guys. And I'll see you guys later.